Welcome back. This is lecture 5 of module 8. So, this is the last lecture of the last module. In this module, we are looking at some of the newer domains where language with respect to society are being studied in from a completely different perspective, that is the perspective of cognition, neuroscience. So, how the mental models, how the mental representations both within individuals and society, they work together alongside language and how the social structures are. So, continuing the discussion, today we will discuss about social neuroscience and the role of language in that. Now, the relation between psychological and the social, it is actually not very new. So, this is humans are fundamentally a social species, and social species by definition generally we create organizations beyond the individual. That is what we mean by society. So, social animals always create larger organizations. So, this is these super organismal structures, they evolved hand in hand with other developments. So, when we from solitary to a social group of animals, when they develop in that trajectory, simultaneously many other changes take place. For example, psychological, neural, hormonal, cellular and genetic mechanisms, because the consequent social behaviors help these organisms survive, reproduce and leave a genetic legacy. The baseline understanding is that as we go from simple to complex social structure, simultaneously there are changes or let us say adaptations in these domains as well. So, psychological and social always go hand in hand, that is the premise. Now, historically this idea is not very new, it seems it goes back to 3rd century BCE to Greek, like all things western, this also goes back to Greeks. So, this Greek physician used his observation of peripheral physiological responses such as the appearance of an irregular heartbeat and pallor in a young man when his stepmother visited. So, what he observed was every time the stepmother of this boy was approaching, whenever she visited, this boy had certain visible changes. So, for example, his heartbeat changed and pallor changed and so on and so forth. So, this is what he took as a connection between the social. So, social is the appearance of the stepmother, psychological and mental was the physiological changes like heartbeat and so on. So, this is one of the oldest references as you find them. So, basically he identified the cause of the individual's malady. What is the problem? So, this problem is that this individual, the stepmother, probably was not having a very positive impact on the boy's mind. Now, scientific research on the brain and the biological processes underlying social cognition behavior can be traced back to the late 19th century and have seen developments ever since then. The term social neuroscience was coined in 1992 by John Cacioppo and Gary Bernstein. So, the claim was that even though the brain is the essential component of social beings, the nature of brain, behavior and society, this is a very complex relationship, a very complex mechanism, and hence it cannot be reduced to merely neural processes. So, what do we need to do? Because whatever the social being does is not a simple thing, it is a network of multiple things. So, while we are looking at the neural signature of the behavior, we should also look at social behavior. So, theories of social behavior require the consideration of both social and biological levels of the organization. So, that is how this field was created. So, social neuroscience. So, these are some of the definitions. Social neuroscience is the interdisciplinary field devoted to the study of neural, hormonal, cellular and genetic mechanisms, and relatedly to the study of the associations and influence between social and biological levels of organization. So, primarily there are multiple, for example, Gazzaniga has also talked about it. So, humans are somewhat unique social species in that our social institutions, civilization and cultures are highly developed and our territorial reach knows few boundaries. So, while we are a complex social being, complex group of social beings, so our brain also works similarly in a very complex manner, and in order to understand the mechanism properly, we need to look at both the social and the neural and cognitive both. So, social neuroscience can be viewed as a single overarching paradigm in which to investigate human behavior and biology and to investigate where we as a species fit within the broader biological context. Only then we will know the whole entire paradigm. So, the goal of this domain is grounded in the premise that there is a lawful relationship between biological, psychological and social processes. Social neuroscience is devoted to understanding how biological systems implement social processes and behavior. Here biological concepts and methods inform and refine the theories of social processes and behavior, and social and behavioral concepts and data inform and refine theories of neural organization. So, basically it is a two-way traffic. While the social processes help fine tune the neural structure, the other it works the other way as well. So, basically it is a complementary sort of an approach where both the processes enrich each other. So, the human brain, a little bit about the human brain. So, a single human brain is the most complex living structure known. So, targeting the biological basis of, this is the key word for us, biological basis of social processes and behavior a quarter century ago represented an understandably daunting task for neurosciences. So, the focus studying the human brain is a very complex thing, and every day we receive newer understanding, newer insight from the disciplines, from the cognitive neuroscience. There are various types, systems neuroscience, computational neuroscience and so on. So, this itself is a very complex domain, neuroscience itself is a complex domain. Now, when we include the social angle to it, it becomes a slightly more daunting, the task becomes a little more daunting. So, that is the fundamental idea that we are talking about. So, this takes us to the social brain hypothesis. So, traditionally it was thought that larger primates brains process ecologically relevant information. So, larger brain better information processing. Now, it fails to take into consideration an important variable, which is that brains are exceedingly expensive to evolve and to maintain. Now, if our brains have evolved, if we have larger brains, so our close cousins, that is higher primates as well as humans, we have larger brain size. Now, to maintain this machine in a working condition is an expensive affair. So, why did evolution think of, why did evolution go this way? Why do we have larger brain? So, the idea is that the hypothesis that was proposed in the 1980s is that primates larger brain reflects the computational demands of the complex social systems. Higher primates are also social beings, a lot of studies have been carried out. So, when you have complex social network, complex social processes and systems, to compute those complexities we need a better brain. So, basically a supercomputer compared to a smaller computer. So, that supercomputing ability is housed in the larger brain of the primates as well as the humans. So, this is where the idea of the social brain comes from. So, society has a role to play in the way the brain is structured, in the way it functions and so on. So, it features tactical deception and coalition formation rarely seen elsewhere. So, this is dubbed Machiavellian intelligence. Now, it is called social brain hypothesis. This was how initially called by a different name. So, lesion studies and neuroimaging technologies in social and emotional information processing, they have brought about better understanding of the social brain. Now, of course, we have very fine tuned, very sophisticated machinery to check neural underpinning of even the minutest social behavior changes. So, Brothers in the 1990 proposed the amygdala, orbital frontal cortex and the temporal cortex as the major neural regions for social cognition. So, what are the major brain areas for processing social information? These are the areas. Later other brain regions have been included as well, for example, the medial prefrontal and the parietal cortices. So, basically this has been developing over a period of time now. So, now we have much better idea about the brain regions and also the kind of activation pattern. It is not only the region, but also the activation pattern. Together they give us the neural signature of any kind of behavior. So, this is how it goes here as well. So, our social cognitive abilities are supported by this interconnected system of cortical pathways connecting the frontal executive circuit to phylogenetically older limbic region in the brain. So, there is a direct connection between the social behavior and the brain region, that is the basic idea here. So, early studies concern social and emotional perception and regulation of emotion. Lot of studies were carried out on emotion regulation. For example, amygdala is perhaps the most studied brain region involved in emotion processing, that now everybody almost this is quite a common knowledge that amygdala is responsible for emotion processing. This is something that goes back all the way to couple of decades back. Now, of course, we have finer understanding. Similarly, studies of theory of mind, social perception and emotion recognition have helped define a unique medial prefrontal social processing network. That is what is the more recent knowledge that we have coming from this discipline. These are some of the representation how the brain looks and what are the areas that we are talking about. So, this is these are the domains where different kinds of processing happens. So, this is color coded, you can check the map as to which is processed where. This is just a broad map, of course. This is not to scale or not to look at like in the very minute correctness, but this is a broad idea about which area of the brain processes what kind of information in terms of social. So, social perception, emotion, motivation, behavioral adaptation, social attribution, so on and so forth. Some research domains let us look at now. So, one very interesting and very productive domain that is now scholars are studying now is the social cognition and language comparing humans and non-humans. So, what is the what are the kind of differences or what are the kind of similarities between the human brain and non-human brain in terms of social cognition. So, as I said, there are many animal species who are also social. They also have a social structure, social hierarchies as well as different kinds of behavioral patterns based on those hierarchies. So, it is very interesting to study how their brain functions. Is it the same way as the human brain? Is it different? If it is different, what are the qualitative and quantitative differences? That is the domain that we are talking about here. So, non-human communication has a relatively small repertoire of calls. So, in terms of language, the repertoire of course is small. So, for example, vocalization of primates exhibit only slight modification during development, while calls can be made voluntarily and timing of vocal production modified. Call types are rarely given in combination. So, it is not the same as the human language where we combine, there are multiple types of combinations and permutations possible that gives rise to what we ultimately call complex language. So, that may not be the case for primates, but still there are points where we can compare. So, primate vocalizations when compared to language are believed to convey only limited information. So, however, the scholars have proposed that human and non-human primates exhibit many homologous brain mechanisms and have evolved to serve similar kind of social functions. So, this is one domain that is very rich, lots of interesting studies are going on, have lots of interesting ideas that have been generated. So, those are homologous as in similar kind of brain mechanism, similar kind of areas and similar kind of mechanism. So, human and non-human primates share many neurological mechanisms for perceiving, processing and responding to communicate signals. These include mechanisms for recognition of faces and voices and for the multisensory integration of bimodal stimuli, specifically voice as well as concurrent facial expressions. When we listen to somebody, we do not just listen to the auditory input, we do not take in only one kind of input, we take both bimodal kinds of input. So, we are looking at the facial structure and as well as we are listening to the auditory input, and the way we process the incoming information takes into account both of these. Similarly, the primates also show this kind of multisensory integration. So, that is what it is we are trying to say here. So, neurons in the ventral premotor cortex of both species are known to exhibit similar neural activity when performing an action and when observing another performing the same action. We are talking about mirror neuron here. So, this is also something that we have seen. Additionally, the ventrolateral prefrontal cortex is crucial in the classification of conspecific calls with different acoustic properties that either are or are not associated with the same events. So, these are some domains that have been studied when we look at the homologous neural mechanisms between humans and non-human other primates. Similar social functions. So, Clark for example, views language as a form of joint action through which people coordinate activities in face to face interaction. He stresses that language users are real individuals with distinct identities, histories and social relationships rather than abstract speakers and hearers. So, this framework provides a useful basis for comparing human language with non-human primate vocal communication. This is a complete domain of research altogether, human communication, vocal communication, non-human communication, and how the communication on the one hand and the neural structure on the other hand, how they are similar, how they are different. This is one domain. So, language is then there is another domain, for example, the idea of proto-mimesis to language, that is from proto-mimesis to language, the idea that has been proposed, that is in the domain of social neuroscience. So, this is another domain. So, language is not only a conventional normative semiotic system of communication, but it is also a bodily skill. Now, how can these two different and apparently contradictory perspectives on language, the social semantic and the embodied, be unified? And this coming together of these two ideas, the social semantic and the embodied idea, they have been put together by Latev and the term he coins is called bodily mimesis as the solution. So, Donald's theory of the origin of human cognition and culture proposed that a form of cognition crucially based on mimesis was the key to the emergence of language. Now, this takes us to the domain of language evolution, but this is again another very important domain and a rather broad domain to discuss, but this is one of the domains where social cognition and neuroscience comes together. Similarly, another interesting current domain, recent domain that is also studied by many scholars is the idea called idea transmission. So, how do we take information, how do we process ideas from another source and then how do we retransmit or transfer the idea, transmit the idea, what is the process and what does it depend on. So, idea exposure, processing and retransmission of social language is another area. Language reveals social cues that we already know, this entire course was about that, through words and their usage patterns. Now, often we tend to retransmit these ideas that we have already gotten from another source. Now, this domain uses neuroimaging methods to understand the underlying mechanism of successfully communicating ideas to others. That is the term given is the idea salesperson. How do we get an idea from another source and how do we sell that idea, that is why salesperson. So, idea retransmission to another person, what happens and what are the underlying neural mechanisms, that is the domain that this particular strand of research looks at. So, neural activity explain variance in successful idea retransmission. So, depending on whether you are successful or not successful in transmitting the idea has a neural underpinning, that is what this domain works. Similarly, another area that again brings together neural, cognitive and social in terms of language is called cultural neurolinguistics. This is also related. The main questions that they ask are what are the similarities and variations in the brain networks in terms of both function and anatomy that are used to process different languages. Is it different? Are they similar? Are they different when it comes to different languages? How these variations come about developmentally and what are the implications of these variations. So, this is another domain that is rather interesting domain which brings together culture, language, the neural part, neural aspects, neural activation as well as neural structure. So, these are some of the current domains that take a completely different point of departure, because the here underlying the most important crucial binding factor is the neural aspect. So, all of these different domains while their research questions might be different, but they all look at the brain image, they use brain imaging as a tool to understand the anatomical as well as functional differences with respect to the different kinds of variables they are studying. So, thus we can wrap up by saying that exploration of the social brain and language is a promising domain that helps us understand the embodied nature of human mental processes better. This is where we will wrap up the course. Now, just summing up, this is how we divided the modules. So, module 1 gave the introduction to the course, where we discussed in brief though, but we discussed language, how language as a social reality became as an important construct. We went back to the history, looked at the 17th century, 18th century, 1700s rather, the scholars and how the different kinds of ideas were formed from then, and how the field has evolved over time, and discussing various scholars in the process. Module 2 is where we started looking at the data, started looking at language variations, language variation in terms of the speaker's position. So, who the speaker is. So, the regional variation, social variation in terms of gender, age, social network, groups, and so on and so forth. And we also had one lecture was devoted to language change as well. Module 3 looked at the language variation. We continued with language variation, but here we talked about the usage based differences. So, style, register, politeness strategies, depending on the usage, the domains, that is where we found out different kinds of variation. So, language variation can be of two types, one is speaker based, other is usage based. These two things were discussed in module 2 and module 3. Module 4 we discussed about speech communities. So, what is speech community, how identities are created, what is language attitude, ideology, what is language socialization, all of these in terms of the community practices is what we discussed with case studies as well. Module 5 we started talking about language contact, what are the different kinds of types of contact, and as a result of which what are the different kinds of outcome. So, language contacts have resulted into different kinds of outcomes, various kinds of language forms also have been developed, pidgins, creoles, mixed languages, all of these things we discussed, and then we also discussed about bilingualism and multilingualism, code mix, code switching, and so on and so forth. We carried on this discussion to module 6 also. In module 6 we talked about this diglossia, and then language maintenance, shift, language death, and then language revitalization, whether it is possible or not, all the nuances we have tried to briefly introduce with examples. And module 6 last two lectures were devoted to discourse analysis. So, we talked about conversational analysis as well as critical discourse analysis in module 6. Module 7 we talked about the applied domains. All these ideas that we discussed about different kinds of variations, how language interacts with the speaker's identity, social position, usage pattern, the speech community. After discussing all of this, we tried to see where it can be used. What are the applied domains? So, there also we have 5 lectures where discussed multiple domains, including some of the more recent domains like forensic linguistics, where socio-linguistic profiling can be utilized for helping aid the legal processes in the in criminal cases and so on. So, that is the domain that was devoted to applied areas. And the current domain, the module 8, last module, here we took into account the domain of cognition. So, how cognition from multiple perspectives also interact with social practices and language structure and language usage. We particularly looked at supracultural models, and then social cognition in discourse, cognitive sociolinguistics, and social neuroscience. These are the domains that we discussed. So, this is how we have tried to, in this course we have tried to give a broad overview through all these 8 modules, a broad overview about how language, society, culture, and even the brain comes together to create what we are as humans. Thank you.